Chapter 141. Game over. The remaining 6 people in the arena were stunned. They were all ability users, yet one had been effortlessly obliterated by another. Could it be? Was the sole survivor in the arena an awakened? The others seemed poised to move, but just then, the skull turned, its blue light scanning the entire field. Everyone else hoped the flying figure would be targeted. She had broken the rules, after all. But evidently, Ling floated serenely in the air, unharmed. They had no choice now. Even if their opponent was an awakened, they had to fight in a contest of speed. They were doomed to lose, and losing meant death. Better to gamble everything on one last push. If they could kill her, they could inherit her identity and have a chance to escape the island. Hope born of desperation fueled their willingness to risk their lives. For once you became a survivor, you were condemned to an endless cycle of death, unless killed by a seeker. The loop would continue indefinitely. This was why most survivors were mentally twisted and utterly mad. Some of them perhaps weren't even trying to obtain the seeker's identity. They knew they had no hope of leaving and might simply want the opponent to grant them a final release. Once the blue light vanished, the 7 figures in the arena launched a simultaneous attack on Ling. Their goal was no longer the end of the game. One person's arm transformed into a thorny vine, piercing upwards. Ling flicked her wrist, and her flying sword flashed, the tip cleanly severing the vine. It then plunged down, impaling the survivor and pinning him to the ground. Another swing of the sword, another instant kill. Suspended in midair, Ling commanded an absolute advantage over those without flight. Swoosh. Blood sprayed, staining the ground crimson as survivor after survivor crumpled. None of these people were awakened. They were all soldier-class ability users, no match for her cult-class power. Even if there were an awakened present, Ling would not have been concerned. All fear stemmed from a lack of firepower. The blue light shone again, and now only 2 remained. They froze, their attack ceasing. Under the light's gaze, the bodies of the dead survivors vanished from the game arena in a matter of breaths. When darkness returned, the sole remaining seeker abandoned his attack. He knew he was outmatched and chose not to resist further, and Ling studied him. His backpack was brand new. He had originally been a seeker. Do you regret betting against these survivors? Her cold voice drifted down from above. The man looked up in surprise, not expecting her to speak. He hesitated, then sighed, a self-deprecating smile on his face. What's there to regret? What right do I have to regret? This was the path I chose. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. Kill me. At least that way, I'll be free. Don't you have any regrets? You can talk to me. There's no time limit in this game. Ling looked down at him, not immediately moving to finish him off. At her words, he opened his eyes again. I'm just a good-for-nothing who never strived for anything. He sat down, beginning his story, not caring if Ling was listening or not. My name is Wangang. I did well in school until the 9th grade, when I met her. The awkwardness of adolescence was so beautiful. I spent all my time planning our future together, and my grades plummeted. I barely managed to get into the vocational high school in our county. It was a chaotic place. There were even people having babies in the girls' restroom. I was a pushover, and the different learning environment made me lose all interest in studying. She and I broke up. She cheated on me with some bleached blonde punk on a motorcycle. I dropped out of school against my parents' wishes. I didn't get a job because I was too young to do anything. I stayed home, playing games on my phone until 2 or 3 in the morning, not getting up until noon the next day. I was immersed in the online world because that's where I could find myself, where I could feel alive. But soon, my father died in a construction accident. My mother didn't understand the law, and the boss only paid a few tens of thousands in compensation. My mother, worn down by hard work, couldn't handle the shock and fell ill. I became the family breadwinner. Even someone as immature as me would grow up after going through that, right? But I had no education, no skills. I'd wasted so much time that even my physical strength was pathetic. All I could do was wait tables in a restaurant. He sighed. Later, I ended up in this godforsaken place. I always fantasized about being the protagonist of a novel, defying fate, reaching the pinnacle of power, and leaving to give my family a life of luxury. Too bad this isn't a game, and I'm not the protagonist of some novel. If I have one big regret, it's that I let my parents down. I failed to repay their kindness in raising me. In just a few sentences, The man had recounted his entire life, his entire experience. He looked to be around in Ling's age, in the prime of his youth, but their lives had been completely different. No, everyone is the protagonist of their own story. But that's how it is sometimes. We only learn to cherish something after we've lost it. And Ling looked at the dejected man below. There were countless others like him. Look at the time. Isn't it time to sleep? Why are you still staying up late? How much do you know about the survivors? She asked, trying to gather more information. She had suspected as much. The hints given to survivors and seekers were different. I know a little, but not much. I only just became a survivor, he said, beginning his explanation. He knew he was going to die, and now he no longer felt fear, but rather a sense of liberation. Outside the room, Li Xinyue still waited at the door. By now, people were starting to trickle out of the other rooms, having finished their games. But without exception, only one person emerged from each room. Even an idiot would have figured out the winning condition for the 7th game by now. Why isn't she out yet? She muttered, looking at the 2 remaining names on the door. She didn't run into an awakened, did she? Impossible. She was so strong. She should be an awakened too. And besides, she had a pistol, a major weapon. It wasn't until half an hour later that the 7th door finally opened. A figure with white hair stepped out, backpack slung over her shoulder. She walked through the crowd, expressionless. Li Xinyue hurried forward, stopping in Ling. They moved to a corner of the 4th floor. Why did it take so long? Did you run into trouble? Chapter 142. The next event. Nothing much, just chatted a bit longer with a stranger, she explained, casually sharing some basic information about the survivors. I see. I knew it. No one could possibly be a match for you. Li Xinyue was mentally prepared for the upcoming games. Even the harsh condition of only one victor wouldn't faze her. Her own ability level was quite high, and she possessed powerful life-saving skills. Few people could compete with her. Moreover, these people might not have recovered their full strength like she had. This made Li Xinyue even more confident about the next games. And I've guessed that this so-called faction war is likely between the 2 identities of Survivor and Seeker, not just simple teams, and Ling said gravely. Since the survivors joined the game, the balance between the 2 sides on the island had been severely disrupted. Seekers had become a rarity on the island. Most people had lost their bets against survivors, switching their identities. Very few had managed to survive this long. You're right. We can't team up in the subsequent games. It's getting more and more brutal, and the mortality rate is skyrocketing. Li Xinyue sighed, thankful that she hadn't rashly teamed up with Ling, otherwise, she wouldn't have a chance to be standing here now. Just then, the light screen announced her number. It's my turn to play. Hope everything goes smoothly. She smiled, and Ling nodded in response. Li Xinyue turned and headed for her game room. After learning about the 7th game from Ling, she understood the rules of the subsequent games. Strength was everything. Ling watched her go, then left the 4th floor as well. There was no way to know the rules of the upcoming games, so there was no point in staying. She might as well go back to her room and rest. Pulling up the light screen, she saw that after winning the 7th game, her points had doubled again, becoming quite substantial. Games cleared, 7. Total points, 256. Time remaining, 16 hours, 21 minutes, 23 seconds. Winning 10 games will earn me at least 2,000 points. Even without extra income, that's already quite optimistic. And Ling murmured. Compared to the other Seeker Islands she had seen, this one was undoubtedly the easiest. Meanwhile, on the construction island in the 6th Sea region, the 2 women's island SUU's vision spun, then snapped into focus, and she found herself back on the island. Looking at the familiar, untouched surroundings, her heart sank. She realized Ling hadn't returned yet. Island name, Frigid Icefield. Clear time, 7 days. Clearance rating, S. Rewards, upgrade card *3, points *300. Bonus rewards, points *50 for killing the Overlord, points *300 for killing professionals, points *550 for killing puppets. Countdown to next island starts in 3 days. So, because Ling and I are on the same island, the countdowns are synchronized? Closing the light screen, Suyu immediately went inside and thoroughly checked each room. As expected, Ling was nowhere to be seen. She sat down on the sofa in the living room, her mood heavy, worry creeping in. It's been 7 days. Why isn't she back yet? Why would she be slower than me? But since the difficulty of the third island was roughly the same, and she had managed to clear it perfectly, and Ling should be fine. Suyu stopped worrying and started sorting through her supplies. First, she spent 900 points to expand their island from its original 360 square meters to 450. Then, she took out the spoils of war from her backpack, cards she had looted from other seekers. 5 reinforcement cards plus the 3 rewarded upgrade cards. The island's infrastructure was already well developed, so the most direct improvement would be to upgrade their cabin. At least, that's what Suyu thought, so she used all 8 cards on the house. Compared to Game World, the island, Frigid Icefield, had simpler and more brutal rules. There were no supplies on this island. Everyone was in an extremely cold environment, facing harsh blizzards at night. The overlord at the center of the island was everyone's target. Killing. Chapter 143. The 8th game. As expected, Li Xinyue also emerged victorious in her game. Her experience was similar to Ling's, a giant checkers game involving 10 participants, with only 1 survivor. However, her luck was slightly better than Ling's. Instead of being the sole seeker among the 10, there were 3, leading to a factional confrontation followed by infighting. The next day, Ling woke up early. It was already the 8th day since arriving here. She had gradually adapted to the life, but the urgency brought on by the unknown survival games remained constant. She habitually rotated the human pendant around her neck, and as expected, a golden figure appeared. Blessing pendant bonus. Unyielding spirit. The body may perish, but the will shall endure. Increased all physical attributes. Time remaining, 19 hours, 34 minutes, 43 seconds. Unyielding spirit again. It seems subsequent games have nothing to do with luck anymore, Ling murmured, slinging her backpack over her shoulder and leaving her room. Returning to the 4th floor, she found that the number of seekers and survivors in the hall had dwindled significantly. Even with the daily influx of people from the 1st floor, it couldn't compensate for the massive death rate. If only 1 person survived each game, then the next game would be composed of the victors from 10 previous games. Ling even wondered if the final game would consist of only a single round, meaning only 1 victor would emerge from the entire game island. The hall was silent, the fear of death weighing on everyone's minds. They stood alone, their gazes constantly scanning the others. Having come this far, everyone was prepared to enter the next game. Each person present could potentially be the next enemy. Ling scanned the surroundings and didn't see Li Xinyue. She confidently approached the game room door, waiting for the light screen announcement. After a half-hour wait, the 4th floor became more crowded. When the mechanical system voice sounded, everyone had arrived. Ling glanced back and noticed that there were less than a quarter of the people compared to yesterday. 4th group personnel numbers: Survivor 321, Survivor 345, Seeker 1973, Seeker 520. After her number was called, she immediately walked to her assigned door. As before, the personnel numbers were clearly listed on the door. There are actually 5 seekers this time? Ling was startled. She quickly checked the other group doors and found they were all the same. When did the number of seekers become so high? She sensed a change in the upcoming game. Without hesitation, she resolutely entered the room before her. Passing through the light film, Ling's vision blurred. She quickly adjusted to the environment and opened her eyes, observing her surroundings. She found herself in a place resembling a gladiatorial arena, surrounded by obstacles that defined the combat area. Beyond this area, there was only an endless, devouring darkness. The other few people were also surveying the arena, their faces showing a hint of confusion. Why are there only 5 of us? Where are the others? A seeker asked, frowning. Maybe they were too scared to come in? Another person sneered. There's still a chance of survival inside. If they don't come in, they can just wait to die outside. Ling glanced at them. They were all seekers, just like her. This meant that this game was indeed a factional confrontation, and the survivors were likely on the opposite side. However, she didn't explain this to them. Before the game rules were announced, these people could very well become enemies. Game name: Death Arena. Rules: participants will be divided into 2 factions with equal numbers. Each side will send out 1 person at a time to duel until one faction has no one left to fight. Note: once in the arena, participants cannot leave or surrender. However, the victor of each round will recover some stamina. Countdown: 10, 9, 8. Everyone was taken aback. Then, a dim light illuminated the center of the arena, allowing them to see the group of survivors gathered on the opposite side. The rules were simple, but also unfair. On the surface, everyone was divided into factions. But in reality, who would be willing to go first? Unless they were confident enough to take on all 5 opponents, the first person to fight would inevitably die, becoming a stepping stone for others. For these desperate individuals, survival was paramount. Going first meant almost certain death. But how to decide the order became a problem. Were they going to start infighting amongst themselves before the game even began? How about drawing lots? Life and death are determined by fate. One of the seekers suggested, breaking the silence. No one present was mentally unstable or intellectually challenged. They didn't treat Ling differently just because she was a woman. This was an era of ability users. Anyone who had made it this far was formidable. All right. Although this isn't the time for negativity, even if we work together, we might not win against them. Dying first or last doesn't make much difference, another person readily agreed. On the survivor's side, there were no such concerns. If they won, they would become seekers and gain the right to leave the island. If they lost, it would be a complete release, finally escaping the endless cycle of pain. Most survivors had become psychologically warped after prolonged torment. Death had become a luxury for them, so both options were fine for the survivors. They allowed those who still had a desire to live to be at the back of the line, while those seeking release took the lead. Of course, even if they longed for release, they wouldn't just rush in and throw their lives away. In their eyes, the survivors were more unfortunate than the seekers. The leading survivor didn't hesitate, walking straight into the arena. On the other side, the seekers were still drawing lots. Ling opened her slip of paper and saw the number 3. It wasn't great luck, but it wasn't bad either. But everyone believed that the person who proposed the drawing hadn't cheated because he was now staring at his slip of paper in despair. It read 1. Looks like my luck isn't so good. Although this is the end for me, I'll try to take the opponent down with me, even if it means mutual destruction. Chapter 144. First battle lost. The man took a deep breath, trying to suppress the nervousness in his heart. The others, including Ling, remained silent. The rules here were just this cruel, and they had no choice but to accept them. As he stepped onto the arena, a prompt popped up on the light screen. Preparation countdown, 59, 58. Both of their backpacks had been prepared with weapons long before they went on stage. At this moment, the 2 men looked at each other, quietly waiting for the countdown to end. With the timer overhead reaching 0, the edge of the entire arena lit up with a blue glow. At the same time, the 2 men almost simultaneously attacked each other. This survivor's physical fitness was far superior to that of an ordinary person, but Ling knew that this wasn't his ability. On their side, the man's ability was to control threads, similar to a spider. This was inherently a strong ability, but the open arena limited its effectiveness, stripping away its most important flexibility, reducing it to a mere form of control without effective lethality. The opponent's intention was obvious: close combat. Only in this way could he maximally restrict the man's ability. Soon, after the survivor successfully closed in, the 2 engaged in close combat. However, the opponent only probed for a bit before actively pulling away. This action puzzled everyone, but Ling was the first to react. His ability's activation prerequisite is to touch the target's body. Hearing Ling say this, everyone immediately understood. The man in the arena also received the prompt, but unfortunately, it was already too late. The survivor quickly retreated to the very edge of the arena, then looked at his opponent with a smug smile on his lips. "You lose." As soon as he finished speaking, he immediately took off his worn backpack and threw it into the air. The zipper had already been opened beforehand, and the items in the backpack spilled out. There was no food, no fresh water, only weapons: knives, swords, axes, pickaxes, and even a huge metal block. These objects were affected by gravity and rapidly fell downwards. Clap. The man clapped his hands nonchalantly, a smile still on his lips. At this moment, all the objects stopped falling and eerily hovered in midair. The next second, they flew towards the survivor in the arena at an even faster speed. The opponent was stunned for a moment, then understood the survivor's ability. It was likely that whatever items he marked could hit the target he designated. Can these scraps kill me? The survivor found it ridiculous. Even if these scraps flew faster, What use would they be if they couldn't hit him? Countless threads shot out from his arm towards the obstacles in the sky, attempting to intercept them all, but he clearly underestimated the opponent's ability. The threads that trapped the swords and knives were forcefully flung aside. Immediately after, he dodged to the side, as the huge metal block had already exceeded the load-bearing limit of his threads. The man's body instantly froze in place, hot blood flowing from the wound in his chest. He was in disbelief. He should have blocked all the weapons at this moment. A long sword pierced through his back, its hilt still stained with his threads. Only the onlookers clearly saw what had happened. Shoo, shoo, shoo. Several more knives and swords flew over, instantly turning the survivor into a sieve, and he lost the last vestiges of life. If I'm not mistaken, the opponent's ability is a guaranteed hit, and Ling suddenly spoke. You mean, as long as he touches someone, any item he throws will hit them no matter what? One of the men's faces turned somber, as it was his turn next. Otherwise, there's no way to explain how his weapons can move a second time in midair, and Ling analyzed. This survivor's physical fitness was stronger than the previous one from the start, indirectly indicating his power. So, as long as you don't let him touch you, you can defeat him? Theoretically, yes, but we can't rule out the possibility that he has other tricks up his sleeve. Thank you. I don't want to die yet. I will definitely try my best. The man saw the countdown was almost over, thanked Ling, and walked towards the arena. In the arena, neither of the opponents spoke, both quietly waiting for the countdown to end. This arena was not small, and it was easy to avoid close combat. Now that they knew the opponent's ability in advance, how could they be defeated? As the countdown reached 0, the survivor quickly retreated backward, distancing himself. This time, the opponent surprisingly stood still, a faint smile still on his lips, a mixture of disdain and self-deprecation. Even if we are all at the same level, our abilities have been honed for over 10 years. How can we be defeated by newcomers who have just mastered their abilities? The survivor shook his head. Unfortunately, I don't have a spatial backpack. He casually picked up his previous weapon, and as the knife and sword clashed, there was a cracking sound, and both blades shattered into dozens of fragments. Clap. As the survivor clapped his hands again, these fragments floated up and instantly flew towards the opponent. Everyone was stunned. He hadn't touched the opponent, yet he could still activate his ability. The survivor immediately started dodging and weaving. Unlike last time, the fragments had lost their original tracking ability and seemed to only move in straight lines. However, even so, with so many fragments in the air, and the target so small and hard to spot, it was still not something the survivor could easily deal with. The two were locked in a stalemate, and the survivor's stamina was rapidly depleting. As time went on, he started to struggle. His ability was close combat enhancement, requiring melee combat to maximize his advantage. However, at this moment, he had no opportunity to get close, and the situation had clearly reversed. And Ling, watching the scene in the arena, shook her head, took her weapon from her backpack. She could see that the survivor on their side was bound to lose, and it would be her turn soon. The remaining two were also worried and anxious. He's not going to win 2 in a row, is he? On the other side, the survivor camp was going wild. They had thought it would be an evenly matched battle, but they never expected the opposing side to be so weak. We're definitely winning this time. Chapter 145, Instant Kill. Dozens of broken blade fragments danced through the air, relentlessly attacking the surrounding area of the arena. The man desperately dodged, trying to get close to his opponent several times, only to be forced back. The entire arena was now riddled with holes. The opponent just stood there, sneering as the survivor scurried around the arena like a wild dog. As his stamina depleted, his speed gradually slowed, and his body was continuously slashed by the blades, leaving behind a series of wounds. Witnessing this scene, if Ling hadn't known the conditions for the opponent's ability activation, she might have thought this survivor had the same profession as her. He targeted the entire arena, constantly controlling the blades to attack it. However, because the arena was so large, he could adjust the specific location of the attacks. And coincidentally, the survivor was standing right there, creating the illusion that he could continuously attack even without touching his opponent. But even after seeing through the opponent's attack method, the survivor still had no way out. The rules of the game dictated that the victory and defeat had to be decided in the arena. He couldn't leave this position. With a small blade suddenly piercing into his body, the survivor's battle officially came to an end. Dozens of blade fragments continuously entered his body, flesh and blood spilling out, blood splattering everywhere. He then heavily crashed to the ground, his eyes looking up at the endless darkness as he gradually lost consciousness. Perhaps worried that the opponent wasn't completely dead, the survivor controlled the huge iron block beside him and smashed it down onto the opponent's head. Bang! A huge dent appeared in the ground instantly, and the opponent became a headless corpse, a mixture of red and white splattering out. A hint of madness flashed in the survivor's eyes. At this moment, he felt that as the first person to choose liberation, he might not need liberation anymore. He wanted to kill his way through the opponents and successfully obtain the identity of a survivor. And Ling drew a sword from her backpack, walked past the others with an expressionless face, and headed towards the arena. The two behind her wanted to say something, but didn't know what to say. Tell her to go all out and kill the opponent? That was nonsense. It was either kill or be killed. No survivor wanted to die. I didn't expect this survivor to be so weak. The man on the opposite side couldn't help but sneer when he saw Ling enter the arena. The two sides were simply not on the same level when it came to utilizing their abilities. You should be grateful that the countdown on the light screen will let you live for 2 more minutes, and Ling retorted coldly. Even for her, the opponent's ability was quite tricky, because the limitations of the arena greatly enhanced his strength. But he also had a very obvious weakness. His own body was too fragile. Ha ha ha, you have quite the nerve. The man didn't care at all. After killing 2 people in a row, he looked down on every survivor present. As the countdown overhead reached 0, he immediately raised his hands to clap and resolve this arrogant woman. A long sword arrived in an instant, directly piercing his chest. He didn't even see how the sword appeared before him. His eyes widened in disbelief as he looked at the white-haired woman opposite him. She was still standing there, motionless, but the sword in her hand had disappeared at some point. The surrounding survivors and onlookers all widened their eyes. A survivor who easily killed 2 other survivors with such a troublesome ability was instantly killed just like that? It was too fast. So fast that the opponent didn't even have time to use his ability. Thud. The man fell heavily to the ground, blood gushing out, staining the arena floor red beneath him. Ling raised a finger. The sword trembled and instantly flew back into her hand. Did you see her ability clearly? One of the survivors said tremulously. The unknown was often the most terrifying. It should be similar to his, some kind of object control ability, but obviously her ability is more advanced. Don't be afraid. Winning only gives you a slim chance. Losing can also be a complete liberation. The remaining 3 encouraged the survivor who was about to enter the arena. Okay. He gritted his teeth and walked into the arena alone. Even if he couldn't defeat the opponent, he at least had to understand her ability. With his arrival, the timer overhead began to flash again. Neither of them spoke, although Ling noticed that this person lacked the arrogance and recklessness of the previous one, showing instead a trace of calmness and composure. But she didn't care, because in the face of absolute strength, everything was futile. Game Island was only the 3rd survivor island. Excluding awakened individuals who were a special case, most of the survivors left here were still at the purple soldier level. This was completely a piece of cake for her current self, unless she was unlucky enough to encounter an awakened individual. Ling had already learned before that the survivors who remained permanently on this island would not only suffer repeated deaths and pain, but their abilities would also be permanently fixed at their current level, unable to be upgraded. Therefore, she had no worries facing these people at this moment, as the countdown ended. Ling casually tossed her sword, and it instantly turned into a stream of light, shooting towards the opponent. Although the survivor's reaction was fast, dodging the flying sword while activating his own ability. His ability was a transformation type, but before his body could fully transform, his head was severed by the flying sword that changed direction in midair. Thud. His wide-eyed head fell from his body and rolled to the side, its gaze fixed on the location of the survivors. The hearts of the remaining 3 pounded wildly, looking at the woman in the arena as if she were a god of death. Her sword can also change direction. Dodging is useless. You have to block her attack before that. The survivor quickly analyzed Ling's professional characteristics, but the problem was how to block the opponent's first attack. The third survivor ignored the others and walked forward on his own. Ling retracted her sword and met the opponent's gaze indifferently. As the countdown reached 0 again, both of them moved simultaneously. This survivor threw a mirror towards Ling, but she ignored it. The flying sword in the air still aimed directly for his head. Just as the flying sword was about to hit the man, his figure instantly disappeared, dodging the attack at the same time. His figure appeared in the mirror that was halfway in the air. He immediately appeared below the mirror, then forcefully threw the mirror in his hand towards Ling again. Interesting. Chapter 146, 1 against 5. Ling smiled, seeing through the opponent's ability. The flying sword in the air, under her control, quickly turned and chased after the opponent. The mirror's flight speed was naturally not as fast as the flying sword's, so the survivor used the same trick again, his figure disappearing back into the mirror. However, the flying sword still caught up to the mirror and instantly shattered it, the intact mirror immediately splitting into a dozen fragments. One of the fragments happened to splash at Ling's feet, and this was precisely the perfect opportunity for the opponent to strike. His figure immediately flew out of the mirror, a dagger in hand, stabbing straight towards Ling's chest. But Ling's swordsmanship level was as high as LV8. How could he possibly defeat her with just a dagger? Clang. Sparks flew as a harsh metallic clang echoed. The man was shocked, his dagger easily blocked by the opponent. In that instant, he was full of openings, and what followed was a spinning kick from Ling. Thud. The man fell heavily to the ground. His body, weighing over 100 pounds, was actually sent flying several meters by a woman. But before he could even think, a sword rapidly enlarged in his vision. Blood splattered, and the man was pinned to the arena floor by the sword. His life force rapidly drained away, and Ling had no intention of torturing him. With a flick of her finger, she ended his life. Seeing that 3 people in a row had been easily defeated by the opponent, the remaining 2 survivors were completely panicked. She must be an awakened. We're so damn unlucky. There's such a freak among the opponents this time. At this point, we have no choice but to bite the bullet and go, the survivor sighed and walked towards the arena. It's not necessary to dodge her attacks. We can win by controlling her weapons, the other survivor shouted from behind. However, the man walking forward didn't respond. Whether he heard it or not was unknown. On the other side, the 2 survivors were excited. They didn't expect that this seemingly weakest girl would single-handedly turn the tables, and it could even be said that the survivors now had a very high chance of winning. Ling still stood there coldly, holding her weapon, quietly waiting for the countdown to end with her opponent. Neither of them spoke. As the countdown ended, this survivor surprisingly took the initiative to distance himself. This puzzled everyone, but Ling didn't care much and still started with a flying sword. The information they currently had on this person was that, besides ranged attacks, she also possessed considerable melee combat skills, making her very difficult to deal with. To defeat her, they had to find another way. The flying sword arrived in an instant, and the man activated his ability. A powerful magnetic force surged, attempting to change the sword's trajectory in mid-air. Bang! The flying sword heavily pierced the ground, successfully deviating from its trajectory due to the influence of his ability. The man stepped forward and grabbed the hilt of the sword. Ling felt that she instantly lost control of the flying sword. No matter how she tried, she couldn't wrest it from his grip. Don't waste your energy. My body's magnetic force is more than 10 times stronger when released. He pulled out the sword and laughed. Now that the opponent had no weapon, how could she possibly be his match? A swordsman without a sword was nothing but a waste. Very good ability, unfortunately, you can only stay in this ghost place forever. Ling chuckled, and the zipper on her backpack opened automatically, and 2 more swords slowly flew out. What? The man's face looked as ugly as if he had just eaten something disgusting. He couldn't believe that the opponent had been hiding her strength all along. Who said I only had 1 sword? Ling sneered, I suppose controlling the sword in your hand is already your limit, right? As she spoke, she flicked her fingers, and the 2 flying swords behind her instantly shot towards the opponent. The survivor knew he had nowhere to run and could only pick up the opponent's sword in his hand and make a desperate fight. Clang! He felt a huge force in his hand, and the sword slipped out of his grasp. Instantly, 3 swords danced in the air, swooping down. The man desperately activated his ability, trying to deflect the flying swords in the air. An arrow pierced his chest. Feeling the intense pain, he couldn't understand how an arrow had managed to get close to him. He looked down and instantly realized it was an ordinary wooden arrow, unaffected by his ability. Not far away, Ling lowered the bow in her hand and casually put it into her backpack. The moment the opponent's ability disappeared, he was already doomed. With the death of the fourth person, only one person remained on the survivor's side. He didn't say anything and silently walked onto the arena. No wonder the survivor camp was so weak. They were hiding a powerhouse like you. The man chuckled lightly. But unfortunately, it ends here. Are you people brain dead from dying too much? You all say the same few lines over and over again? And Ling dismissed the man's pre-battle boasts with disdain. The man didn't explain much, a faint smile still on his face. You'll find out soon. As the countdown ended, Ling, unlike the previous times, directly attacked with 3 swords. Boom. A huge earthen wall rose from the ground, instantly blocking Ling's attack and also obscuring her vision. By the time the earthen wall was shattered, the opponent was nowhere to be seen. Ling felt a vibration under her feet and did a backflip without hesitation. Her feet were precisely caught by a flying sword, and she hovered in the air. Looking down, the ground was churning softly like water, and several earth spikes emerged from her previous location. Ling quickly gained altitude. As she had guessed, these earth spikes indeed had a height limit, probably only about 3 meters. Seeing that his sneak attack had failed, the man had no choice but to reveal himself. Clearly, he hadn't expected this woman to be able to fly. Awakened? Ling frowned, looking at the man below. This didn't seem like the strength a soldier-level individual could display. He activated his ability too quickly, even summoning an earthen wall for defense just before the flying swords arrived. I didn't expect you to have a hidden card. In that case, let's see whose ability runs out first. The man didn't answer Ling's question, instead intending to engage in a protracted battle with her. He had no means of attacking the air, and the opponent obviously couldn't do anything to him for the time being. Ling, however, laughed upon hearing this. Unfortunately, I hate protracted battles the most. And coincidentally, I have a weapon specifically designed to deal with awakened. Chapter 147. The Choice, the Final Game. Hovering in midair, Ling waved her hand, and the 2 flying swords behind her instantly transformed into 2 golden streams of light, diving down like lightning towards the survivor below. A sneer appeared on the man's lips. This level of attack was useless against him. He slammed his hands onto the ground, and a thick earthen wall rose around him, encasing him securely within. Bang! Bang! The swords pierced the earthen wall, but were then squeezed by the continuous flow of earth, attempting to trap them firmly within. The swords vibrated continuously, 2 different abilities wrestling against each other. Both of their stamina rapidly depleted. Ling remained expressionless, controlling the flying swords to slowly descend. In contrast, fine beads of sweat had already appeared on the forehead of the man inside the earthen wall. Suddenly, as if sensing something, his face lit up with joy. You dare to descend? You're courting death. The veins on his forehead bulged. At this moment, he unleashed his full power. The ground within the entire earthen wall began to churn, stone pillars connecting to it, constantly reinforcing it until finally, the 2 swords were completely immobilized. An opening appeared in the wall directly in front of him. He sneered, locking eyes with Ling in the distance. A swift flying sword came hurtling towards him, but the man had anticipated this move. The opponent could only control 3 swords, and one had to be used for flight. 2 swords were no match for him, so to break the stalemate, she would inevitably take a risk and choose to descend, using her last sword to fight. But unfortunately, I've already seen through this trick. The man laughed disdainfully. A giant hand formed of earth and rock rose from the ground in front of him, instantly blocking the flying sword's attack. At the same time, countless earth spikes surged forward, reinforcing the rock hand and attempting to trap the opponent's last sword. This way, he would surely win. But as the hand between them slammed the flying sword to the ground, their eyes met again. This time, a smile played on the girl's lips. What was that? The man looked at the arm Ling was holding up, puzzled. But before he could think further, bang! A loud explosion echoed throughout the arena. The two survivors watching the battle were stunned. That's a gun. No matter how fast the flying swords were, they could still be tracked with the naked eye. But bullets were different. Their initial velocity was hundreds of meters per second, imperceptible to the ordinary human eye. This was why the man didn't immediately choose to defend. Not only was there no time, but he also didn't expect the opponent to have a gun. Thud. The man's body fell heavily to the ground, blood seeping into the cracks of the arena floor. His gaze was forever fixed on the endless darkness above. Survivor Camp wins. As the system announcement rang out, the two survivors outside the arena immediately cheered. They had practically won this game lying down, without exerting any effort or facing any life-threatening danger. It was over just like that. Too strong. 1 against 5, and she even defeated an awakened among them. The first two were just unlucky. They died for nothing. The two muttered to each other, fully aware that they hadn't contributed anything. At this moment, they also understood that if she had been the first to enter the arena, the result would have been the same. Ling ignored them. With the game declared over, she could finally leave the arena. Games cleared. 8. Total points. 512. Time remaining. 17 hours, 1 minute, and 3 seconds. Looking at the information, she smiled faintly. Her current total points had reached 500. If there were other rewards, this harvest would be even more bountiful than the last. Returning to the 4th floor hall, the people here were the same as always. And Ling didn't see Li Xinyue. After scanning the surroundings, she didn't see her number on any of the room doors. She probably hadn't participated in the game yet. After all, it was still early morning. Back in her room, and Ling washed up briefly and lay down on the bed to rest. Today's game was complete, and she had the whole day free. The entire game world island, up to now, only had 4 floors. She had already thoroughly examined it, and there were no hidden missions, let alone any island ruler. Moreover, calling it an island wasn't entirely accurate. It was actually a giant indoor space, because neither Ling nor the survivors had ever left this indoor space and reached the outside island. Simply put, everyone was currently inside a huge enclosed space. Ling's current mission was to dutifully participate in the final 2 games and then leave this island. As for the remaining time outside the game, it was a complete waste to her. Time quickly passed to nightfall. At midnight, a notification from the light screen suddenly lit up the entire room, waking Ling from her slumber. She groggily opened the lights in the room. The 9th game will be mandatory for all personnel on the island. All island rules are lifted. Game name, the ticket of choice. Description: are you tired of pain and pursuit? Killing and conquest aren't everything. Stay here, enjoy wealth and prosperity, never worry about food or drink, and even achieve immortality. The only price is staying on the island forever. Choice: become a survivor or remain a survivor candidate. Ticket: kill a survivor to obtain a survivor candidate ticket. Kill a survivor candidate to obtain a survivor ticket. The game has begun. Obtaining a ticket will unlock the final game. Ling's eyes widened, and she abruptly sat up in bed. Looks like I can leave this island today. She just didn't expect the system to try to tempt survivor candidates to give up their identity. She turned the pendant on her neck and quickly got out of bed to wash up and pack her belongings. Blessing pendant bonus obtained. Extremely lucky. Don't doubt it, you're the luckiest person right now. Time remaining: 23 hours, 58 minutes, and 43 seconds. After preparing everything, she carefully opened the door. This final game was likely related to luck. But this 9th game only required killing 1 survivor, and their identities were easy to distinguish. The only thing to be wary of was that other people might also be waking up at this time, preparing to take action. Chapter 148, The Exit Gate. Ling walked down the corridor. The surroundings were abnormally quiet. Not a single person had come out to search for their target. Were they not anxious? No, they must be incredibly anxious. But the more urgent the situation, the less reckless one could be. Now, without the protection of the rules, venturing out into the corridor could easily make one a target. Ling sneered and walked openly towards another room down the corridor. Her ability sensed that most people, both survivor candidates and survivors, were currently hidden behind their doors, waiting for an opportunity. However, she couldn't clearly distinguish their specific identities. She worried that if she killed the wrong person, the generated ticket couldn't be changed. It would be troublesome if she somehow became a survivor. Who would want that so-called eternal life? and Ling chose to ignore these people, cautiously guarding against them as she approached Li Xinyue's room. She had a feeling that the final game would be something extraordinary. Knock, knock. The crisp knocking sound echoed in the corridor. Light footsteps approached from within, and a figure peered through the peephole, observing the situation outside. "It's me," and Ling said in a low voice. "And Ling?" A slightly puzzled voice came from inside. "You're not here to kill me, are you?" The game had just been announced, and Ling was already here. It was hard for Li Xinyue not to be suspicious. Huh. And Ling was speechless. "Do you think I want to become a survivor?" "You never know. The strong always seek immortality." Hearing this, Li Xinyue actually believed her, but couldn't resist teasing her. "Even if I wanted to kill someone, I wouldn't pick a tough nut like you." The door opened, and Ling rolled her eyes at her before stepping inside. The two sat on the edge of the bed and chatted briefly. Li Xinyue understood her thoughts. "You mean, we should get our tickets now and enter the 10th game?" "Yes. The longer we wait, the fewer people there will be. Let's finish this quickly and leave. This place will soon descend into chaos. We're safer together." And Ling's biggest worry was that these people would become bloodthirsty. If no one was left, where would they get their tickets? "Okay. I was planning to wait until I woke up and take action during the chaos. Acting now will make us targets, but since you're here, I'm not afraid." Li Xinyue started packing her belongings, making final preparations. Soon, they left the room. The third-floor corridor was now filled with several survivor candidates, and possibly survivors as well. These individuals tiptoed around, tense and alert, ready to strike at any moment if a figure appeared in their line of sight. "How do we distinguish their identities?" Li Xinyue asked doubtfully. Several people had passed by them, but they hadn't acted rashly because they couldn't confirm their identities. The most obvious distinguishing feature was the backpack. But now, apart from Ling and Li Xinyue, no one had a backpack, eliminating the most straightforward method of identification. These people also didn't dare to act rashly, worried about getting the wrong ticket. Like Ling and Li Xinyue, they were all observing, waiting for absolute certainty before making a move. "Follow me." And Ling led Li Xinyue towards the first floor. Their identities were currently public. She had already sensed the killing intent from those people when she passed them earlier. But there were too many people here. These lone wolves were worried about becoming targets themselves, so they didn't dare to act rashly. What Ling needed to do was to go to a secluded place and lure them into attacking. Those who attacked them were highly likely to be survivors. She didn't believe any survivor candidates would willingly stay and become puppets on this island. They arrived on the first floor and chose a relatively secluded corner to sit down. Currently, the entire first floor hall was closed, with no games in progress, making it the best hiding spot. They weren't the only ones with this idea. Soon, many people appeared on the first floor. Initially, they were just looking for a hiding place, but the mission still needed to be completed. So, their gazes turned towards the only two girls in the hall. Ah! Suddenly, a scream came from upstairs. Someone had been killed. Immediately after, Ling sensed something and abruptly turned around. She discovered that a giant circular archway had appeared on the previously dark wall. Like the game rooms on the fourth floor, it was filled with a white energy membrane. Everyone in the hall also sensed the anomaly and looked towards it. Is this the next game, or the exit? Ling looked at the door in surprise. Yes, the 10th game was related to leaving. This was the exit of the hall. Instantly, both survivor candidates and survivors became excited, even frantic, upon seeing the door. "I've seen that woman. She's a survivor candidate." A man in the hall pointed at Li Xinyue and shouted. In an instant, the closest few people lunged towards them. Li Xinyue looked at the man who had spoken. He was one of the survivor candidates who had survived the previous game with her. And Ling. Before she could finish, Ling understood what she meant. "But we can't let that guy live either." As she spoke, she stepped onto a flying sword and shot out. Li Xinyue also immediately activated her ability, preparing to deal with the approaching individuals. Those attacking them were undoubtedly survivors. As long as they were dealt with, they could successfully complete the 9th game. After eliminating one of them, Ling immediately charged towards the survivor candidate man who was trying to take advantage of the situation. The man, seeing the opponent's companion charging towards him, sneered. The reason he exposed Li Xinyue's identity was that he wanted to become a survivor. He clearly overestimated his own strength and underestimated his opponent. As the long sword pierced his chest, sending a spray of blood into the air, his mind went blank, his face full of disbelief. Was he going to die before he even had a chance to fight back? Please spare me. And Ling ignored him, pulled out the weapon from his chest, ended his life, and then returned to Li Xinyue. This scene successfully deterred those around who had wanted to attack them. They froze in place, no longer daring to make a move. This time, they had kicked an iron plate. Chapter 149. Triggering the game. Li Xinyue had also dealt with her opponent, but instead of killing him outright like in Ling, she used her ability to restrain him. Unsure which of them was a survivor candidate, she needed to interrogate them first. Whoever admits their identity first, I'll let go, she announced, looking at the 4 captives. Their heads were encased in water spheres, the suffocating sensation unbearable for most. After a full minute, most were nearing their limit, and Li Xinyue released her ability. The 4 spoke almost simultaneously. I'm a survivor. Survivor candidate. She plunged her dagger into the one who had yelled he was a survivor candidate. Did you think I was that easy to fool? Game 1. You have made your choice. Your camp, survivor candidate. Games cleared. 9. Total points, 1024. Time remaining, 23 hours, 21 minutes, and 23 seconds. At the same time, Ling saw the notification on her own light screen. They were both waiting for the 10th game to begin. Congratulations. You have chosen your camp. The final game will now begin. Everything is hidden behind the door. No game instructions? Li Xinyue was puzzled, then looked uncertainly at the door behind them. Let's go. Ling picked up her weapon, and they walked towards the circular archway. As for what would happen to the remaining survivors and survivor candidates, it was no longer their concern. Passing through the light screen, their vision blurred momentarily, and then they were stunned by the sight before them. Behind the door lay the world outside the hall, but the sky was still invisible. Massive walls enclosed the area, and behind them was the vast game hall. Now, standing outside, they finally saw its full extent. It was a square building, plain and unadorned, like a matchbox, and the massive walls surrounding it enclosed it tightly. The sky was dark, or rather, it was a ceiling connected to the high walls. Even attempting to leave by sword flight was impossible. What is this? Have we entered a new game area? Li Xinyue frowned, her mood darkening at the sight. Ling crouched down, examining the soil on the ground. I don't know what these walls are for, but we're definitely on the island now. The walls were imposing, at least a kilometer away, and their height was easily over 100 meters. Moss grew on their damp, dark surfaces. The door they had come through had disappeared. Even if they wanted to return to the game hall, there was no way. Since the final game is hidden behind the door, and there's nothing here, it's obviously related to these walls. Let's go take a look. And Ling stood up and said to Li Xinyue. The environment was too dark to make out the details of the walls, which was why she wanted to get a closer look. Don't tell me we have to trigger this 10th game ourselves? Li Xinyue wondered what the system was up to. The surroundings didn't look like they were hiding any missions. They soon reached the walls. Looking up at the massive structures, they saw that the surfaces were covered in strange patterns, not as smooth as they appeared from afar. Ling touched the wall. 10 seconds passed, and nothing happened. The walls were seamless, without a single gap. How could they trigger the 10th game? Do we have to wait for others? Li Xinyue wondered. Ling didn't know either. Let's walk along the edge and see if we can find anything. After a while, they followed the wall's edge to the middle, where a large gap, or rather, a door, appeared before them. Peering through the gap, they saw a complex network of paths formed by interconnected walls, leading to unknown destinations. Is this a giant maze? Li Xinyue exclaimed in surprise. The inside was pitch black, making it even more difficult to find the exit. Moreover, this was an enclosed space, so even during the day, the interior would remain dark. It seems the 10th game is for us to navigate this giant maze. Ling took a flashlight from her backpack. The white beam illuminated the interior, allowing her to observe the basic layout. What's outside the maze? Li Xinyue asked. I don't know. Maybe the edge of the island? Ling turned off the flashlight and looked at Li Xinyue. Shall we go in? It seems we have no choice. Let's go. Li Xinyue nodded. The lack of game rules had one advantage. They were no longer restricted and could openly team up and enter together. At least, in this situation, two people had a higher chance of survival than one. Ling glanced back towards the game hall. It seemed no one else had come out yet. They were the only two on the open ground. Then, they stepped inside. A cold wind carrying an indescribable stench blew against them, ruffling their hair. Rumble. A teeth-grinding scraping sound came from behind. Ling and Li Xinyue quickly turned around and saw the entrance slowly closing. With their speed, they could easily retreat before the entrance closed completely. However, they exchanged glances and chose to stay put. With a final rumble, the massive stone door closed completely, plunging the surroundings into darkness. At the same time, a notification appeared on the light screen. Congratulations, survivor candidates, for not retreating. You have qualified for the game. Game name: Forward Maze. Rules: navigate the maze to win. Note: this is the final game. Victory means escape from the island. The instructions are so brief. Does that mean if we had retreated, we wouldn't have triggered the final game? Li Xinyue said, looking at the game rules. This was the first time she'd seen a game with such simple rules. Chapter 150, The Shifting Maze. The game is called Forward Maze, isn't it obvious? And Ling rolled her eyes. Since it's a maze, what more explanation do you need? Just find the exit. Let's go. Let's try to leave this hellhole before dawn. They stepped into the darkness, the weak beam from the flashlight illuminating only a small area ahead. The passage was wide, a full 5 meters across, with dark, mottled walls covered in moss on either side. A faint stench permeated the air. Sniffing carefully, Ling detected a subtle smell of decay, suggesting that many had died in this maze. The path was wide and straight, and with the dim environment, it was impossible to tell whether a corner turned left or right until they reached it. Soon, they arrived at their first intersection and stopped. Which way do we go? Li Xinyue looked at Ling. If you trust me, don't ask at the next intersections. Just follow me. Ling didn't ponder over which path to take. Since it was based on luck, she would follow her instincts, without overthinking. Okay, I trust you. A hint of joy appeared on Li Xinyue's face, thinking Ling had a plan. Ling nodded and decisively turned right. Of course, before leaving the intersection, she marked it with her sword. For the next half hour, they wandered through the maze, losing track of how many intersections they had passed and where they were, only able to continue aimlessly. Rumble. A loud noise echoed, and Ling froze, looking up. The walls on both sides were vibrating, and dust falling from the ceiling made the air quality even worse. An earthquake? Li Xinyue blurted out almost subconsciously. They observed their surroundings, finding nothing unusual. The tremors lasted only 2 minutes before ceasing completely. They continued forward, but at the next corner, they froze. The flashlight beam shone on the greenish-gray wall, revealing one of Ling's sword marks. But the problem was, this was a dead end. It was just a corner, not an intersection, and Ling had no memory of being here before, let alone marking it. Why is our mark here? Li Xinyue felt a sense of dread. She was terrified of encountering supernatural events. If I'm not mistaken, the tremors earlier were the maze walls shifting. Ling's expression was grave. If that were the case, their markings were useless. The tremors occurred half an hour after we entered the maze, which means the maze changes every half hour, she added. This was a constantly changing maze. The layout would shift continuously. As expected, the final game wouldn't be that simple. Perhaps there were other dangers lurking within. Then, will your method still work? Li Xinyue asked uneasily. It will work. It always works. We'll definitely leave this place within 2 days. Ling continued forward with her flashlight. She said 2 days because it was already her 9th day here, and the island might sink in 2 days. By then, even if they didn't want to become survivors, they wouldn't have a choice. They unconsciously quickened their pace. This level of physical exertion wasn't a problem for ability users. They needed to explore as much of the maze as possible within half an hour. Ling looked at the compass in her hand. Although it wasn't very helpful, even often leading them to dead ends, it at least gave them a general direction. Rumble. The tremors started again. They didn't dare to stop, quickly moving forward. Within 2 minutes, they passed 3 intersections, but couldn't see any walls moving. Could we be wrong? and Ling wondered if the wall movements were invisible to the survivor candidates. She chuckled. That would be too ridiculous. If that were the case, as long as there were enough people, it would be no different from an ordinary maze. What's so funny? Li Xinyue asked, puzzled. And Ling shook her head without answering. Suddenly, and Ling stopped Li Xinyue and made a shushing gesture. They stood silently at the corner, waiting. The surroundings were silent, and they could even hear each other's heartbeats. Li Xinyue's eyes were filled with confusion, unsure why An Ling was doing this. But soon, she was startled by faint footsteps approaching from afar. Someone. It made sense. Although they were the first to enter the maze, they had been wandering around for over 2 hours. It wasn't surprising that someone else had entered. But the footsteps were uneven, one heavy and one light. Was it a cripple? Tap, tap. The footsteps grew clearer. An Ling drew her weapon, making Li Xinyue even more confused. Shouldn't they exchange information when encountering others at a time like this? Why resort to violence without a word? However, An Ling's ability sensed that what was approaching wasn't human. It was a creature with no breath. But this wasn't the time for explanations. As the creature's footsteps drew near, the flying sword behind her hovered into the air. The moment the creature's figure appeared around the corner, An Ling immediately sent the flying sword flying towards it. The sound of flesh being torn echoed. The creature's chest was pierced, and its body instantly sliced in half. Green blood splattered onto the nearby walls, emitting a puff of white smoke. Only then did Li Xinyue understand. But before they could examine the creature they had killed, tap, tap, tap. Countless footsteps echoed around them, their rapid rhythm suggesting a frantic rush towards their location. Not good, we've been discovered. Let's hide. And Ling and Li Xinyue immediately decided to flee. They didn't know how many dangers awaited them in this giant, unknown maze. This wasn't the time to waste their abilities. How did they find us? She asked as they ran. I don't know. Maybe the smell of its blood, or maybe it's the game rules. Chapter 151. Clues. Don't back down. And Ling warned. Since the game was called Forward Labyrinth, there must be a hint in the name. Okay. Li Xinyue understood this as well. The two ran from one intersection to another, the sound of footsteps still following behind. After running for 2 minutes, An Ling seemed to have thought of something and stopped in place. Why aren't we running anymore? Li Xinyue quickly stopped and turned to look at her. In the darkness, she could only make out a blurry outline of An Ling's face. Forward means we can't retreat. Would you say that facing the monster's pursuit is considered retreating? An Ling suddenly said, the sword floating in the air returning to her hand. She turned around and started walking back the way they came. You plan to take them all out? Li Xinyue slowly walked over. I knew it. With our combined strength, there's no need to run. Their opinions aligned, and they decisively stood in place, waiting. Since they couldn't retreat, they naturally wouldn't go back to deal with the monsters. Soon, the monsters surged out from the corner behind them. The two used the light from their flashlights to clearly see their appearance. They were a group of zombie-like creatures. Their clothes were tattered, some wearing shirts, some in school uniforms, encompassing almost every kind of clothing. Undoubtedly, they were survivors who had died in the labyrinth, transformed into these grotesque figures by the power of the rules. Their bodies were highly decomposed, riddled with holes. These festering wounds were even crawling with white maggots, a sight that was sickening. The surrounding air became even more foul. An Ling brought 2 fingers together, and the 3 swords floating behind her immediately flew out, weaving through the monsters and shredding them into a mess of body parts. Even Li Xinyue's water attacks could easily pierce and destroy the bodies of these monsters, who were much weaker than they appeared. Thump thump. Dense footsteps sounded again, this time from directly in front of them. An Ling immediately turned around. I'll handle the ones ahead. But when these monsters poured out, they weren't the same zombies as before. Instead, they were a kind of alien creature that crawled on all fours in a strange posture and could climb walls. These new monsters were incredibly fast and agile, and even the shell covering their bodies was extremely hard. They didn't seem like creatures evolved from humans, but their heads were indeed pale human skulls, just with their faces facing upwards and their necks twisted 180 degrees. They climbed on the high walls, moving back and forth, as if searching for a weakness in the two below. Suddenly, These monsters launched a fierce attack on Li Xinyue, seemingly believing that her water attacks posed no threat to them. Naturally, they would choose to pick on the weaker opponent. A flying sword danced in the air, emitting a melodious hum. These legendary weapons inherently had a special lethality against these monsters, not to mention being enhanced by Ling's ability. The flying sword moved freely in the sky, constantly weaving through the monsters, each skull it pierced exploding like a watermelon. A foul-smelling rain of monster body parts fell from the sky, all deflected away by Ling's ability. The green blood was corrosive, and she didn't want to touch the disgusting stuff. As for the small monsters charging forward, they were a piece of cake for her. Soon, these monsters were easily dealt with by the two. Green, viscous blood flowed everywhere, and the piles of body parts emitted an unbearable stench. Is that it? Li Xinyue felt a little unfulfilled because her ability level had just increased. This meant that these monsters provided experience points. Of course, she wasn't the only one whose ability had upgraded. Ling's level had also increased. No special prompt? Ling was a little confused, thinking that the system would at least give some kind of hint. It seemed that these monsters weren't much help in getting them out of the labyrinth. The pile of monster corpses in front blocked their path. Ling took out a bottle of resin she had prepared in advance from her backpack and poured it over the corpses. As she lit it with a lighter, the surroundings instantly burst into flames. Clouds of black smoke billowed upwards, quickly spreading throughout the sealed environment. There's not even a hint of wind. This means we're still very far from the exit. Ling watched the flames and black smoke, all rising straight upwards. After burning for about 10 minutes, the monster corpses were basically incinerated. Cough, cough. Put out the fire. Ling quickly told Li Xinyue to extinguish the fire. If it were up to her, she would have to wait for the flames to die down on their own before moving forward, and she would probably suffocate from the smoke. Li Xinyue activated her ability, instantly condensing a large amount of water to extinguish the flames. I hate fire. When the black smoke in front of them had cleared, the two covered their noses and prepared to move forward. Ling stepped on the charred corpses and suddenly felt a strange object under her foot. She stopped, lifted her foot, and looked. It was a key, wrapped in a piece of burnt corpse. Looks like my luck is about to play a role. She revealed a slight smile and casually cleaned off the debris. Soon, a palm-sized golden ring key was presented before her. A key with special uses. Note: secrets are hidden in the outer area of the labyrinth. Locked doors stand within. Use the key to open them. Rebirth or destruction, both are in your hands. Found a clue. It seems we just need to reach the outer area as soon as possible and collect as many keys as possible along the way. Ling put the key into her backpack and looked at Li Xinyue, who nodded in agreement. I understand why it's called the Forward Labyrinth now. If we had run away just now, we probably wouldn't have found this key. Since the doors were hidden in the outer area, the first thing to do was confirm their current location and then kill more monsters to get more keys. Having obtained a concrete clue, the two no longer obsessed over finding the exit, but instead took advantage of the labyrinth's shifting walls to search for monsters. Soon, morning came. Several hours had passed, and more survivors were entering the labyrinth through different entrances. Chapter 152, Little Girl Overnight. The two had collected a total of 4 keys and killed many monsters. The only thing they couldn't determine now was their current location. For Ling, who had the stroke of luck blessing, 4 keys were more than enough. The reason she hadn't rushed forward was that she wanted to kill more monsters to gain experience points. Woo-woo, the two had just finished off a group of monsters, but hadn't obtained a key for it. As they were walking through the labyrinth, they suddenly heard a tender cry from not far away. Li Xinyue was startled and couldn't help but tremble. It can't be a ghost, right? Ling also tried to pinpoint the direction. The sound seemed to be coming from the right front. It was a little girl. How could there be a child here? It was obvious that she was connected to the monsters in this labyrinth. Let's go take a look. We might find something. She made a decisive decision, and the two immediately followed the sound. After circling around for nearly half an hour with only a wall separating them, they finally bypassed the wall and arrived at the little girl's location. A room was embedded in the dilapidated high wall, its exterior tightly sealed with thick iron bars, like a cage. A square iron block hung next to it, with a key-shaped groove on its surface. The little girl's crying was coming from inside this cage. However, since this area was flush with the outer wall, the two couldn't directly see the scene inside and had to walk over to get a closer look. And Ling and Li Xinyue cautiously approached. The little girl's crying continued, and she didn't seem to notice their approach. Li Xinyue's palms were already sweating nervously. She was genuinely worried about seeing some terrifying creature. And Ling walked in front and was the first to arrive at the cage. Looking inside, a little girl in a red dress was sitting on the ground crying, her hands covering her eyes. She didn't notice the figures at the entrance at all, but just looking at this scene made their hearts beat faster. It was eerie, too eerie. The cage wasn't large, about the size of a bedroom. But the strange thing was that there was nothing inside, not even a bed, not even a single piece of straw. The little girl's clothes were spotless, as if she had just put on new ones, and she looked perfectly normal, with no wounds on her body, not looking disheveled at all. Seeing this, no one would believe she was a child, and Ling was more inclined to believe she was a ghost. "Hey, stop crying," she shouted to the little girl inside, her voice echoing in the silent labyrinth. The girl lowered her hands and looked over. She actually stopped crying, a hint of joy appearing on her face. "Great. Are you two big sisters here to save me?" Hearing that the girl could converse without any barriers, and Ling showed a trace of surprise and immediately asked, "Who are you?" "Me? I don't know who I am either. I only know that I've been trapped here since I can remember. Every time I meet older brothers and sisters, I ask them to save me, but they all get scared and run away. You're the rare ones who haven't been scared off," the little girl said sincerely. Perhaps it had been too long since she had talked to anyone, and she seemed very lively. Hearing this, the two were stunned. This meant that the little girl was neither a survivor nor a player, but rather some kind of native creature living on the island. "Then how long have you been locked up here?" Li Xinyue saw that the girl didn't seem threatening, so she squatted down and spoke to her in a gentle tone, trying to get more useful information. "I don't know. When no one is with me, I cry every day. I don't know how long it's been, probably a very, very long time," the little girl answered innocently. "What do you do when you're hungry or sleepy?" "When I'm sleepy, I lie down and sleep. When I'm hungry, it goes away after a while." And Ling and Li Xinyue continued to try to get information from the little girl in this way, and she answered everything without reservation, seemingly very happy just to have someone to talk to. From the information the two had gathered, the little girl's behavior was very strange. They finally came to a conclusion. This seemingly normal little girl was not human at all. The very long time she mentioned had to be longer than the time they had been on the island. During this time, she hadn't seen any survivors, which meant that survivors couldn't enter this labyrinth. The little girl could survive without eating or drinking until now, not to mention participating in any games. Even during her time being locked up here, she hadn't even seen the monsters in the labyrinth. Was it a coincidence? And Ling obviously didn't believe it. There was only one possibility. These monsters were all afraid of this little girl and didn't dare to come near her. "So can you two big sisters let me out? It's so boring in here." The little girl widened her eyes and pleaded with them again. The two exchanged glances, both seeing the hesitation in each other's eyes. "Those monsters seem to be afraid of you. Why don't you ask them to let you out?" "They won't listen to me. Only older brothers and sisters can open this door. Those ugly guys can't." Although the little girl hadn't seen the monsters, she seemed to know everything about the place. "Okay, since they won't let you out, big sister will." As she said that, and Ling picked up a key and was about to open the door for her. "And Ling?" Li Xinyue hesitated, and Ling looked back at her and gave her a reassuring look. "It's okay." As the key's outline overlapped with the groove on the cage, the iron bars began to decay strangely, eventually turning completely into rust powder. The little girl immediately ran out happily. "Thank you, big sisters. You're such good people. Now that you're free, where are you going?" And Ling said with a smile, stroking the little girl's head. The girl thought for a moment. "I don't know. How about I follow you big sisters?" Li Xinyue was startled. She had thought they shouldn't let the little girl out in the first place. The fact that she hadn't shown any aggression relieved her a bit, but she didn't want this monster to join their team no matter what. It was undoubtedly a time bomb. But before she could speak, and Ling had already spoken first, "We're leaving this place, and we might encounter many monsters on the way. Aren't you afraid?" Chapter 153. escaping the island? I'm not afraid at all. They're more likely to be afraid of me. Humph humph. The little girl said proudly. Okay, if that's the case, then come with us. And Ling also replied with a smile. Only Li Xinyue beside her looked puzzled, but she still chose to trust in Ling and silently followed along. And so, the three of them set off again, taking a new route. After an hour, and Ling suggested they take a break. She and Li Xinyue leaned against a wall corner, eating and restoring their stamina. Here. She handed a piece of bread to the little girl, who happily took it and put it in her mouth. Thank you, big sister. It's delicious. And Ling then gave the little girl a bottle of water. Eat slowly, don't choke. Big sister is so nice. I've forgotten how long it's been since I last ate. The little girl still had that innocent face. Soon, they set off again. Just as the little girl had said, no matter how they walked this time, they didn't encounter a single monster. This might be a good thing for ordinary people, but it wasn't so good for the two of them. Not only did they lose their source of experience, but they also couldn't get any more keys. The probability of finding the exit with only 3 keys was very slim. Big sisters, I suddenly remembered something. The little girl stopped and said. The two looked back with puzzled eyes. Remembered what? If you two big sisters don't leave here soon, you'll die, right? As she said this, her eyes showed a trace of sadness and reluctance. Yes, that's why we're so anxious to leave here. Li Xinyue explained, and Ling nodded in agreement. I don't want you to die. You two big sisters are good people. As the little girl said this, her eyes seemed to well up with tears, and she looked like she was about to cry again. I'll send you away. Her young eyes became determined, and she took 2 steps forward and opened her arms. Woo woo woo! The little girl made a strange sound that echoed throughout the labyrinth. Rumble. At this moment, the surrounding high walls began to move. The two were shocked to see the walls in front of them completely moving away, and the side passages completely closing, leaving only a straight, sealed path forward. At the end of the path were several huge stone doors, each with a keyhole carved in the center. Without a doubt, that was the end of the labyrinth. You've been controlling the movement of the labyrinth all along? Li Xinyue said in surprise. The little girl shook her head. My abilities have just recovered a bit. The one controlling the labyrinth's movement and the one who locked me up is a very powerful being, but it's been gone for a long time. You're the ruler of this island, right? It's the first time I've seen a sentient being here. And Ling said, Ruler? That's what these strangers who come to the island call me. She nodded without denying it. Big sisters, you should go now. The exit is in the second room on the left. The other rooms are full of disgusting monsters, some even stronger than I am now. You've changed the environment of the labyrinth like this. Won't you be affected? Li Xinyue finally realized that the ruler of this game island and the system seemed to be somewhat at odds. No, the labyrinth will continue to move according to its original trajectory in a while. It won't know. The little girl said confidently, after all, this was her territory. And Ling squatted down and looked at the little girl in front of her. After we leave, remember to hide. Not everyone will be nice to you, and there are many powerful people inside. Okay, I believe you, big sister. The little girl nodded obediently. Killing a ruler would only give them a few dozen more points. And Ling was not someone who would repay kindness with malice, especially since the other party was just an innocent little girl who had been very friendly to them from beginning to end. Be good. Li Xinyue also went up and touched the little girl's head. Then she and Ling exchanged glances, said goodbye to the little girl, and walked together towards the end of the passage. Goodbye, big sisters. The little girl stood there and waved to the two in the distance. After recovering some of her strength and memory, she knew that she might never see these two again, and of course, they were just 2 passers-by in her long life. And Ling, did you already guess that she was the ruler of this island? As soon as they reached the end of the passage, Li Xinyue couldn't wait to ask. I guessed. I thought she would lead us out of the labyrinth, but who knew we could take a shortcut directly? And Ling said with a smile, and at the same time, she gave Li Xinyue a key. This was the edge of the labyrinth. In the passage the little girl had created, there were only 3 doors in front of them. Without a doubt, the exit was behind the middle door. Before Ling went up, she inserted the key into the keyhole on the stone door. Immediately, the door began to vibrate violently, and with a rumble, the stone door slowly opened. There was no light curtain inside the door, just an ordinary gate. Dazzling sunlight shone in, dispelling the darkness. Their eyes passed through the doorway and saw the surging sea outside. The salty sea breeze blowing on their faces brought a smile to their faces. Looks like we don't need 2 keys. Yeah. The two walked through the stone gate and out of the labyrinth. In front of them was a cliff, with waves crashing against the reefs at the bottom, making a loud noise. They were at the edge of the island. As the game ended, the system prompt popped up. Number of games cleared, 10. Total points, 2048. Remaining time, 12 hours, 31 minutes, 13 seconds. Congratulations, survivors, for successfully completing 10 games and clearing the island. Preparing to leave the island, countdown. 10, 9, 8. We're finally going back. Li Xinyue breathed a sigh of relief. This was the island I spent the longest time clearing. Me too. And Ling also nodded. After they exchanged a few simple words, the countdown reached 0. A sense of weightlessness followed, and their vision began to spin. In a daze, their feet landed heavily on the ground. And Ling opened her eyes and found herself back on the small island. She went to the balcony and looked at the gazebo by the shore, where Suyu was fishing for supplies. Sure enough, she came back a long time ago. And Ling wasn't in a hurry to greet her, nor did she have time to check the changes in the cabin. Instead, she put down her backpack and quietly waited for the settlement rewards to arrive. I wonder if taking the back door this time will affect the evaluation. Chapter 154. Upgrading the Villa. Island name, Game World, Completion time, 10 days. Completion rating, A. Rewards, Upgrade cards *3, points *2048. Bonus rewards, points *420 for killing professionals, points *50 for killing puppets. Countdown to next island, 13 days, 15 hours, 27 minutes. As expected, and Ling murmured, then closed the light screen interface and went downstairs. This survival island was special. She had barely touched any of the supplies in her backpack. Arriving on the first floor, she noticed the interior decoration had become more luxurious. Although still wooden, it was glossier than before, as if it had been polished and waxed. Some of the facilities in the house were also more modern, most notably the furniture like sofas and tables, including the fireplace and windows, which had at least been reinforced once. Suyu, and Ling called out, standing at the doorway. Hearing her voice, Suyu quickly turned back with a delighted look. And Ling. She put down her fishing rod and walked over quickly. You're finally back. Yeah, this island was a bit special. We had to stay for the full 10 days. And Ling explained. Look at my upgraded house. Suyu pointed behind her, and the two moved away from the doorway to look up. The original 2-story brick house had now become a finely decorated small building, somewhat resembling the kind of 2-story houses built by wealthy families in modern rural areas. The exterior resembled a villa, with a European style, but at least for now, it couldn't quite be considered a villa yet. It was a significant upgrade from before, and it was clear that Suyu hadn't been idle during this time. This was definitely not a difference that could be achieved with just one upgrade card. Not bad, but my harvest this time was also pretty good, and Ling said with a smile. They currently had close to 3,000 points. Opening the shop panel, the items inside had indeed refreshed. Besides the basic foundation cards and location cards, 2 new items had been added. One was a reinforcement card for 300 points, and the other was Random Point Blind Box. Contains various cards and special rewards, from upgrade cards to a single piece of wood. Anything can be obtained from here. Price, 100 points. Note, there is a daily purchase limit, equal to the number of survivors on the construction island. Seeing the description, and Ling smiled and decisively spent 200 points to buy 2 blind boxes. Suyu was dumbfounded watching her .2 cube-shaped mechanism boxes appeared in her hands. Pressing the switches on top, the boxes instantly disappeared and condensed into 2 cards. Wow, how is your luck so good, and Ling? Suyu was stunned, looking at the 2 cards in her hand. These should be considered the top rewards, right? A red and a green card, an upgrade card and a skill card, respectively. I didn't expect to be able to get skill cards from this. And Ling's blessing today was stroke of luck, so it was hard not to have good luck. By the way, I've saved all the boxes I fished up these past few days. My luck should be pretty good now, right? Let's just open them all. Suyu still remembered what Ling had said, and now she had to believe it. Her luck sometimes was truly ridiculously good. No problem, it looks like we'll have a big haul today. Ling went to the basement, and Suyu continued to the seaside to fish. They currently had 2,730 points remaining, and Ling's level was Black Horse, LV. 9 basic swordsmanship. Suyu was Blue Horse, LV. 5 basic archery. Clearing each survival island allowed them to quickly improve their strength. Of course, currently, this was the only way by evening. The two had been busy all day. As the sun set, the resources on the sea also disappeared. Ling held a stack of cards, looking happy, while Suyu was busy preparing dinner. From the afternoon, plus the boxes from the past few days and the cards she originally had, the rewards were quite good. They had obtained reinforcement cards *2, upgrade cards *5, building card *1, item cards *3, and the rest were basic materials like food and such. The building card was special. It was a harbor, which could be used to dock their boats. Harbor building card. An indispensable building. Building materials required. Iron ingots *100, wood *800, rope *200. Gain points *10. The materials required were just basic materials, so Ling directly chose to use it. As the card in her hand disappeared, she took a flashlight and went outside to check. The harbor had been built on the right side. Nothing special overall, except that the originally square island now had an indentation, just like the character All. It could be used to dock boats, with special tools on both sides to secure them, and a wooden ladder to board the boat directly. Ling estimated that with the current width of their island, accommodating 2 boats was more than enough, not to mention that their island hadn't been expanded yet. At dinner, the two discussed and decided to use all 7 cards to upgrade the house, as their current house was only 1 step away from being upgraded to a villa. Who wouldn't want to have their own seaside villa? Of course, before that, they had to expand their island. After spending 1,500 points, their island's area reached 600 square meters, with an edge width of approximately 24.5 meters. The remaining 1,000+ points were more than enough for their use during the next half-month. Ling and Suyu took the cards outside. With a flash of light, the 7 cards in their hands instantly disappeared, and the house in front of them began to change. The house now occupied an area of 200 square meters. The 2-story building had been upgraded to 3 stories, with a rooftop balcony. The surrounding walls were no longer ordinary cement walls, but were now decorated with natural stone, giving the whole building a grander appearance. The front windows had also become panoramic glass windows, eliminating any worries about lighting. The main door was an exquisite wooden door with a copper lock. The foundation of the house had also been raised, requiring a few more steps to enter. The 2 flower beds at the entrance had also become integrated with the house. The only drawback was that there were no plants in them. At least from the outside, the two were quite satisfied. This should be considered a villa, right? Chapter 155, A New Event. Suyu said uncertainly. It was night, and their vision was limited, making it hard to observe the details. At least in Ling's view, their current house was still quite inferior to the large manor on the Novice Island. But there was no helping it. Most of their house was an empty shell. Not only did it lack furniture, but they also had to enter in the dark at night. Let's go inside and have a look. The night sea breeze was a bit chilly, carrying a fishy smell. Even though she was used to it now, she preferred not to stay outdoors when she didn't have to. Inside, the changes weren't as noticeable. Opening the main door revealed a spacious hall. On either side were 2 spiral staircases. There should have been a giant chandelier overhead, and a red carpet underfoot. Of course, these were all absent. The rooms were on either side, 2 bedrooms in total. A kitchen, bathroom, living room, dining room, and everything else were present. The second floor had all the same rooms except for the kitchen. Only, the study had no books, and the meeting room and lounge only had bare floors. Our house seems. Suyu trailed off. Mainly, there's no furniture, no electricity. It's not that different from the previous house, just a bit bigger. Ling complained directly. As for the remaining 2 item cards, they were clearly underwhelming, the kind that were neither useful nor worth discarding. They were fixed torch and nightstand. Their functions were obvious from their names. Who would stick a torch on their villa? The nightstand was slightly more useful. In the end, Ling placed the fixed torch under the wooden shed of the ranch. Their rooms were still on the second floor. It was still early, so they sat together and chatted. After all, they had just returned from the survival island and had a lot of experiences to share. Most importantly, they could learn about other islands this way. By the way, I feel like the weather outside has become much cooler since I came back, and there was no wind at night before. Suyu suddenly said, as if she had thought of something. And Ling, do you think this could be related to the next event? If nothing unexpected happens, we should know tomorrow. And Ling hadn't yet recovered from the previous high sun scorching heavens event. After all, the event hadn't ended when she left, but Suyu, having returned a few days earlier, had experienced the changes. Why? She was puzzled. Shouldn't it be a gradual process? Today is already the last day on the survival island. All the survivors who cleared it should have returned. And Ling explained. She had also discovered a strange point. When she was alone, the time on the survival island would freeze. But now that she had a teammate, the situation seemed to be different. It seemed that time would only freeze when the first person on the island returned. Could they go out to sea and raid other islands during the frozen time? And Ling hadn't tried it, but she wanted to give it a shot if she had the chance. But she felt that the system shouldn't leave such an obvious bug. Perhaps the time freeze was a kind of protection for uninhabited construction islands. They chatted for a while before returning to their rooms to sleep. The night was long, and sleeping was the quickest way to pass the time. In the early hours of the morning, both of them were fast asleep. The countdown for Ling's blessing ended at that moment, and 3 prompts popped up. Stroke of luck duration 100 hours. Obtain special reward. 1 item card. Stroke of luck duration 200 hours. Obtain special reward. 1 upgrade card. She wasn't woken up by the first 2 messages, but the event announcement that popped up later started broadcasting automatically, finally waking her up completely. Current event. Raging storm. Duration. Until entering the next survival island. Description. The foreign survivors have disturbed the monsters slumbering on the seabed. They awaken from their sleep. They command wind and rain, and they are determined to devour these intruders. And Ling was stunned. What kind of event was this? Evolving directly from harsh weather to supernatural creature attacks. How were ordinary survivors supposed to survive? She got out of bed and went to the window, looking out at the sea through the glass. Although her vision was obstructed, the sound of the surging waves crashing against the edge of the island undoubtedly told her that the weather outside was worsening. Opening the window, the sea breeze that hit her face caused the hair by her ears to fly back. The wind blew into the room, making whooshing sounds. And Ling. Knock, knock. There was a knock on the door, and Suyu called out from outside. Come in. Suyu pushed the door open and saw Ling standing alone by the window, enjoying the sea breeze. This event? Yeah, I guess it's some kind of sea monster attacking the island. Let's call them sea beasts for now. And Ling took out her flashlight, and a beam of light shone from the house to the seaside. Come and have a look. Suyu came over. Her eyesight was much better than Ling's, and she could sense the gaze of all living creatures. After a moment, she shook her head. There's nothing. It seems these guys won't be coming out for a while. We should still be able to get a good night's sleep tonight. And Ling closed the window and sat back on the edge of the bed. The system wouldn't start with high difficulty. As Suyu had said, it would be a gradual process. Although there was still some worry on her face, since Ling had said so, she could only relax. Suyu returned to her room, and they planned to go back to sleep. At least there shouldn't be any problems tonight. Lying in bed, Ling turned the pendant around her neck and picked up the item card she had just received. Blessing pendant bonus, double happiness, all obtained materials are doubled. Remaining time, 23 hours, 49 minutes, 21 seconds. The moment she saw this blessing, a glint flashed in her eyes, as if she had realized something. And the item card in her hand was also something special. Growth Accelerator, a magical item, can accelerate the growth rate of plants, the breeding and egg-laying speed of animals, etc. Note, can only be used on fixed buildings and has no effect on survivors. This is a good thing. And Ling's face lit up with joy. With this, they could have a continuous supply of vegetables. It was a pity there was only one. She could only choose to install it in the greenhouse. Chapter 156, The Sea Beast's Attack. The next day, the two woke up early. And Ling went outside to observe the changes in the sea. The sky was dark and gloomy. The sea was whipped by strong winds, and the distant waves rolled and surged relentlessly. All of this was a clear sign of an approaching storm. I'm afraid it's going to rain heavily soon. She looked worried. In this kind of weather, they wouldn't be able to explore resource islands. This meant that not only their strength development, but even their supplies would rely solely on fishing from the sea. Suyu was preparing breakfast while Ling installed the growth accelerator on the greenhouse. The harvest time for all vegetables was fixed at 7 days, which was fortunately not too long. Back inside, Ling immediately browsed the trading post, intending to trade for more greenhouse building cards. This way, at least the next time they faced such a crisis, the island's resources could be self-sufficient. Greenhouses were practically useless for others because the growth cycle of the vegetables was too long, at least a month. These survivors couldn't be sure whether they would even live that long. Of course, while trading for building cards, Ling didn't forget to buy more seeds, tomatoes, eggplants, cucumbers, and so on. Vegetables were expensive, but their seeds were surprisingly cheap. After breakfast, she successfully traded for 2 building cards. Their farm expanded to 60 square meters. Although only slightly larger than a bedroom, the vegetables grown were enough for the 2 of them to eat for a while. It feels like the events will become more and more difficult. It's clearly an event, but there are no rewards at all. It's a total rip-off. Suyu sat under the gazebo, fishing for supplies, and couldn't help but complain. That's why we have to hurry up and develop, at least to be self-sufficient on the island. Ling also sighed. Whoosh, the wind howled, almost overturning the gazebo above their heads. Ling, the waves seemed to be getting bigger and bigger, and they're all rushing towards the island. Suyu looked into the distance, and as far as she could see, the waves beneath her feet were the largest. Those sea beasts are probably coming out. They're controlling the tides. Ling also noticed this. But this also had a benefit. The resources on the sea would all drift towards the island, not only saving the trouble of fishing but also greatly increasing efficiency. The wooden dam at the edge of the island seemed so fragile in the face of the surging waves, as if it could collapse at any moment. Boom! A thunderclap echoed, and a purple lightning bolt split the sky. Here they come. Suyu quickly warned, and she stood up and quickly retreated. Splash! The sea surged, shanshi a huge wave. A thick purple tentacle suddenly shot out from the sea and slammed heavily onto the wooden dam at the edge of the island, sending wood chips flying. Immediately afterward, another tentacle of the sea beast emerged from the water, followed by its purple head. It was a giant octopus monster the size of a house. Its eyes emitted a captivating purple light, and numerous tentacles with barbs and covered in disgusting mucus grew beneath its round head. Its eyes were fixed on Ling and Suyu. 2 tentacles had already reached the shore and were about to land. Ling also hurriedly retreated. She stretched out her right hand, summoning the weapons from her room to fly quickly towards the shore. The 3 flying swords intertwined, forming golden flashes. Clank! A sharp sword light flashed, and the sea beast's thick tentacle was instantly severed like tofu. Before it could even struggle, the other 2 swords pierced its body, dismembering it. Green blood and body parts splattered everywhere, quickly swallowed by the seawater and carried into the depths. Phew, I thought it would be more difficult to deal with. Suyu breathed a sigh of relief. A giant creature like that probably isn't afraid of piercing damage from handguns and arrows. Ling immediately opened the light screen and repaired the dam, preventing the seawater from continuing to surge onto the island. Yes, generally octopus-type monsters have regenerative abilities. When you cut it up just now, I saw a special organ inside its body. My intuition tells me that's its weakness. Suyu added. As her level increased, she had now mastered a very useful skill, seeing through the enemy's weaknesses and flaws. Of course, this was based on the premise that she could defeat the opponent. Otherwise, it was ineffective. Whoosh! Heavy rain poured down from the sky. The surging waves and howling winds didn't lessen because of the death of the sea beast. The environment became increasingly harsh. The 2 quickly salvaged the supplies washed ashore and returned to the house. This was the first sea beast to attack, but it certainly wouldn't be the last. I don't know how many people will die in this event. Suyu looked out the window. It was now pouring rain outside. I wonder if these sea beasts are edible. Huh. Ling was taken aback. Are you sure you want to eat those slimy tentacles? Bored in the house, the 2 opened the chat channel to pass the time. They hadn't realized it before, but upon looking, Ling discovered that the events experienced by those with abilities and ordinary people were completely different. Ordinary people were also suffering from such harsh weather, but without the sea beast attacks, their crisis became the rising sea level caused by the continuous storms and waves. Their only concern was whether their islands would be submerged and the difficulty of obtaining supplies in extreme weather. Seeing this, Ling was reminded that they were also facing the rising sea level, a crisis that wasn't really a crisis, while dealing with the sea beast attacks. It seems we need to find a way to reinforce the dam. This sudden event threw the survivors into chaos, and it also strengthened their resolve to band together. Some professionals' abilities weren't suited for combat, making it difficult for them to survive against the sea beasts. The best course of action then was to join other survivors' teams and seek protection. After all, there was strength in numbers. Ding dong. And Ling, who was reading the chat, suddenly received a private message. Opening it, she saw it was from Lighthearted Li. Can I borrow your island for a bit? My boat can't hold up much longer. The wind and waves are too strong, and with those monsters, I don't dare to drop anchor. And, sure, provided you can still reach our island. Chapter 157, A Strange Discovery. In reality, Li Xinyue's situation was far worse than she had let Ling know. This event was extremely unfriendly to survivors who relied on boats for survival. Currently, she was sitting inside the wooden shed, constantly using her ability to clear the accumulating water inside the boat out into the sea. Her boat had also been damaged during the recent sea beast attack. Although she had successfully dealt with the sea beast, there was no guarantee when another monster might emerge from the depths, intent on destroying her vessel. The rain was too heavy. If she didn't control it, the cabin would be completely flooded and sink within half an hour. Li Xinyue hurriedly adjusted the coordinates on her navigation locator. Fortunately, her current location wasn't too far from the origin coordinates, but the wind and waves on the sea greatly affected her speed. Meanwhile, Ling had successfully killed another sea beast without even leaving her room. The dam had been partially destroyed again, which was the most annoying part for her. The sea beasts weren't appearing too frequently, and they weren't very strong, making them easy for the two to deal with. She had a vague feeling that killing these sea beasts also granted experience points. Otherwise, she couldn't explain today's blessing on the survival island. Killing monsters not only granted experience points, but also bonus point rewards. Of course, this still needed to be verified. Time passed until noon. Ling went to prepare lunch, and Suyu stood alone on the third-floor balcony, monitoring the surroundings of the island. With her as a human radar, any approaching sea beasts could be immediately detected. Just then, Li Xinyue steered her small boat, rocking precariously on the waves, towards their island. Suyu instantly spotted her and went downstairs. Ling, the ship doctor is here. She really knows how to pick her moments, Ling said, having just placed their lunch on the table. She hadn't prepared any bowls and chopsticks for Li Xinyue, not because she was stingy, but because there simply wasn't a third set in the house. Forget it, Suyu. You make a set of bowls and chopsticks for her. I'll go out and take a look. Ling sighed and pushed the door open, stepping outside. Using her ability, she automatically blocked the falling raindrops, creating an invisible barrier as she walked towards the edge of the island. Ling directed Li Xinyue to dock her boat in their harbor. Li Xinyue was drenched. Her white shirt had become semi-transparent, revealing her somewhat ample figure. Her hair was messily bundled up, and she wore a straw hat, which clearly didn't offer much protection from the rain. She was slightly surprised when she saw Ling's house. It had only been the duration of one survival island, and the original two-story building had transformed into a three-story villa? Had they developed so quickly? Could one extra person really make such a huge difference? Thank you. She extended her hand and was pulled ashore by Ling, her appearance quite disheveled. Looking at Ling, even in the rain, her clothes weren't even slightly damp. They had just parted ways on the game island yesterday. This damned event. Li Xinyue couldn't help but complain. The sea beasts weren't a threat to her either, but because of her boat, she was still having a hard time. Come inside. Ling beckoned. Inside, Suyu had already prepared bowls and chopsticks for her. The table was full of steaming hot food. You haven't eaten yet, have you? Sit down and join us. No, I'm just here to take shelter, not to freeload. I need to figure out how to fix my boat quickly. Li Xinyue declined Suyu's offer. She really had nowhere else to go, which was why she had contacted Ling. Really? You won't eat? You probably didn't have time to cook on the boat, did you? Ling looked at her questioningly. Don't worry about me. I've already eaten. She walked to the window and used her ability to remove the water from her clothes. Her soaked clothes instantly became dry. That ability is really useful. Suyu couldn't help but look at her with envy. She felt that everyone else's abilities were flashy, while hers was not only simple but sometimes even useless. Seeing Li Xinyue's stubborn refusal to eat, Ling and Suyu had no choice but to give up and started eating on their own. And Li Xinyue continued to stand by the window, staring at the sea in a daze, lost in thought. Just stay here for a while. There are plenty of rooms upstairs, and we have everything you need. Suyu offered. She had a good impression of the doctor who had saved her. After hearing about Ling's encounter with Li Xinyue on the previous island from the plane, she knew that the girl wasn't inherently bad. I still want to. Before she could finish, Ling interrupted her. In this weather, you want to explore a resource island? Aren't you afraid your boat will be destroyed by those sea beasts when you leave? Do you plan to stay on the resource island forever? Yeah, the current environment is too harsh. It's better to wait until we return from the next island. Suyu also advised that Li Xinyue was speechless. Of course, she knew they were right. Strange. How did I not notice you were so stubborn before? Ling stood up to clear the table, giving Li Xinyue a sideways glance. Boom. A thunderclap echoed outside the window, and the rain intensified. The wind howled, and large raindrops pelted against the glass, as if trying to shatter it. Huge sea beasts emerged from the water. Some were giant, winged fish, some were seals covered in spikes. Others had huge, saw-like teeth. Their light bulb-sized eyes glowed scarlet as they all charged towards the island. Why are there suddenly so many of them? Suyu stood up, grabbing her weapon, ready to deal with the monsters. Seeing this, Li Xinyue also quickly stood up. I'll go too. Ling seemed to have noticed something. The sea beast's target had always been clear, the survivors. They didn't seem interested in anything else. Could it be that the number of sea beasts attacking the island is related to the number of people on the island? She also took her sword and went out. There were monsters all around the sea. The three of them split up, guarding different directions, protecting the dam at the edge of the island. On the sea, Li Xinyue could fully utilize her abilities. Even though her offensive power wasn't strong, she could still easily deal with these monsters. Suyu also possessed the ability to see through weaknesses and had perfect accuracy, making her more than capable of handling them. The three quickly eliminated all the attacking sea beasts. Among the corpses, Ling discovered something strange. Chapter 158, The Sea King. Good things come in pairs triggered. Item drop rate doubled. It was a red crystal. Ling held it in her hand, feeling the faint coolness emanating from it, and immediately the light screen scan followed. Experience Crystal. A special item dropped from a certain creature. Using it grants a portion of experience points. Note: using it may attract the attention of more powerful monsters. Looking at the message displayed above, Ling was pleasantly surprised. There's such a good thing? With more sea beasts, wouldn't the experience points be endless? In the current ocean world, besides a few exceptional awakened, Ling was confident that her level was at the forefront. If there were sea beasts that even she couldn't handle, then this world would probably be nearing its end. Therefore, she wasn't worried at all about the potential danger from sea beasts. Since Ling had killed the creature that dropped this item, the ownership naturally belonged to her. However, she still shared the item's information with the other two. After confirming that killing sea beasts could make them stronger, the three of them became more motivated. Even the severe weather caused by the ongoing event didn't seem so annoying anymore. This continued for 3 days. During this time, the three of them didn't know how many sea beasts they had killed, but the drop rate of experience crystals was extremely low. However, they also gained another piece of information. Killing these sea beasts could also grant experience. Li Xinyue's ability level had increased without absorbing any experience crystals. This was undoubtedly another piece of good news for everyone. During these few days, the island's wooden embankment had been upgraded to a more sturdy stone one. At the same time, due to the heavy rain these past few days, the sea level had risen almost 10 centimeters above the island. If it weren't for the embankment, the three of them would probably be living in the water now. The gale still howled, and the sea beast attacks wouldn't distinguish between day and night. At this moment, and Ling floated above the villa on her sword, surveying the surroundings in the darkness. Tonight was her turn to keep watch. Li Xinyue and Suyu had already gone to sleep. Based on the experience gained from fighting sea beasts these past few days, once the storm on the sea surface became more turbulent, it meant that the enemy was about to land. And Ling wasn't as good as Suyu in this aspect. In this pitch-black night, she couldn't detect sea beasts landing in time, and could only rely on her hearing to judge the size of the waves on the sea surface to distinguish them. Whoosh! The sound of raindrops mixed with the wind, accompanied by the sound of waves crashing against the sea surface, constantly entered her ears. After an unknown amount of time, and Ling's heart suddenly beat faster. Something's wrong. Why are the waves on the sea surface getting smaller? That's right, judging from the sound, the wind and waves were indeed decreasing. Even the heavy rain falling from the sky had lessened considerably. This was too strange. Could it be that the event was ending early? Just as Ling was still wondering and thinking, whoosh, a cold gust of wind suddenly struck her head-on. Clang! She immediately held her sword in front of her, blocking the sudden attack. Sparks flew from the clash of metal. Although Ling blocked the attack, her figure was knocked back several meters by the immense force. If it weren't for her skillful control over her ability, she would probably have been knocked out of the sky directly. The sparks that had just erupted also allowed her to clearly see the weapon that had attacked her. It was a golden harpoon. No, it should be called a trident. This moment, a merman standing 2 meters tall with blue skin stood on the island's embankment. Its upper body was covered in scales and bulging muscles. Its head was a huge fish head with sharp teeth. Its lower body, a fish tail, supported it as it stood on the land. If Ling could clearly see the other party's appearance, she would subconsciously think that this was the Sea King often mentioned by people. Its trident flew back into its hand automatically, just like Ling's flying swords. At this moment, Ling also arrived in front of the island and sensed the other party's outline through her ability. There was no doubt that this was also a sea beast, and an extremely powerful one. It was different from ordinary sea beasts. Its eyes didn't emit a red glow, but just standing there quietly put immense pressure on Ling. Seeing that the other party had taken the initiative to come before her, and that its weapon had returned to its hand, it suddenly erupted, shattering the embankment beneath its feet, and charged towards Ling with incredible speed. 2 flying swords sliced through the rain curtain and instantly met it, but this usually unstoppable attack had no effect whatsoever against this Sea King. It merely waved its trident and easily deflected the flying swords. With a flash, it had already appeared in front of Ling, holding its trident high above its head and thrusting it directly at her head. Ling knew that her strength was no match for the opponent's and immediately dodged to one side. But what greeted her was the other party's huge tail. With a boom, although she blocked it with her sword, her body was still sent flying by the tremendous force. Ling rolled on the ground, quickly adjusted her posture, and half knelt on the ground. Bang! A loud noise rang out. She decisively fired her gun. The monster was caught off guard and was successfully hit. However, the bullet only shattered its scales and embedded itself in the flesh. Green blood flowed out, but the damage caused was very limited. What? Ling was somewhat surprised. This was the first time she had encountered a being that wasn't afraid of firearms. Its scales were too hard. She had to attack the areas on its body that weren't covered in scales. The monster stood in place and dug out the bullet with its finger in front of Ling. It didn't make a sound, but in the next second, it attacked again. Obviously, this thing was angry. Whoosh whoosh, 2 pitch-black arrows shot out. The monster quickly stopped its advance and retreated. Then, a water dragon attacked from the side, but it was directly smashed apart with a tail swipe. Suyu and Li Xinyue were also awakened by the gunshots and joined the battle. The monster had strong night vision, which was very disadvantageous for the 3 of them. This moment, after concentrating on controlling 3 swords, Ling had no time to shield herself from the rain. Her entire body was already soaked in rainwater. 2 swords floated behind her. She understood that the other 2 were only suitable for support. She had to be able to block this monster in a head-on battle, or else they would all die. The moment the 2 forced the monster back, in half a breath's time, Ling took the initiative and attacked with her sword. 2 flying swords stabbed directly at the monster's eyes. Just as the opponent blocked the attack, she also slashed directly at the location where it had been shot. The monster simply twisted its body and used its scales to block the attack in the next second. It actually grabbed Ling's weapon with its hand, and the trident in its other hand thrust straight towards her. Chapter 159. Breakthrough. Ling decisively abandoned the weapon in her hand, and simultaneously, a weapon flying from the air directly met the monster's trident. With a bang, she felt a stinging pain in the webbing of her hand, and the sword in her hand was knocked away, but she also took the opportunity to retreat and dodge the opponent's attack. The monster didn't pursue the victory, but instead held its trident high. As an invisible ripple emanated from the top of the weapon, the raindrops in the sky eerily suspended in midair. The three of them were stunned. This guy could even control water. Clusters of raindrops turned into sharp arrows and indiscriminately attacked the three of them. Li Xinyue immediately stepped forward, fully unleashing her ability. A huge water curtain rose up, merging all the incoming water droplets. In the next second, the water curtain was torn apart, and the monster rushed in, thrusting directly at Li Xinyue. However, her reaction wasn't slow either. She quickly liquefied and dodged the attack, reappearing not far away. Ugly monster, you're still 20,000 years too early to play with water with me. And Ling, standing nearby, immediately took out her pistol and threw it to Suyu. Don't spare the bullets. With that said, she once again charged forward with her sword. Two flying swords danced in the air, and several arrows shot out, constantly interfering with the monster's movements. At first, it was still on guard, but after realizing that none of the three's attacks could cause substantial damage to it, it stopped defending altogether except for its joints and vital parts. And Ling was knocked back again. Her body was now covered in mud, and she looked disheveled. Coupled with the interference of the heavy rain, she had already narrowly dodged the monster's attacks several times. She lowered her head and glanced at her chest. It was already past midnight. She immediately rotated the pendant around her neck. Prayer pendant bonus acquired. Unyielding will. The body may be destroyed, but the will shall endure. Increases all aspects of physical attributes. Remaining time, 23 hours 10 minutes 12 seconds. And Ling, be careful. Suyu shouted a reminder. Seeing the trident enlarging in her vision, she immediately held her sword with both hands and met the attack head-on. With a dull thud, and Ling's legs trembled slightly. She had actually blocked the monster's attack head-on. The tip of the trident was only a few millimeters away from her cheek. A slight loss of strength would cause her to be pierced instantly. Bang! A gunshot rang out, and a bloody hole appeared in the monster's palm. It immediately retracted its weapon and began to retreat, simultaneously looking in Suyu's direction. Whoosh whoosh. Immediately afterward, two flying swords attacked. Two sparks flew as they scraped against the monster's scales. In the next second, these two scales were actually severed and fell to the ground. The monster was completely stunned. It was furious and confused, not understanding why the enemy had suddenly become so much stronger. And Ling, not far away, also breathed a sigh of relief. Unyielding will strengthened not only her physical attributes but also, of course, her profession. Sure enough, Suyu's gun power is not on the same level as mine at all. The monster raised its trident and was about to control water again when a flying sword instantly attacked. This time, it didn't dare to resist head-on and could only block the incoming attack first, successfully interrupting its spellcasting. Several water blades rose up around it and continuously slashed at the monster. Compared to controlling water, Li Xinyue was much faster than this monster because she didn't need to rely on tools, and her spellcasting had no wind-up. The only difference might be that her power was a bit lacking. Of course, she didn't expect to kill this monster herself. She was just trying to provide cover for the other two's attacks. Ling rose up with her sword and attacked. The monster swept its trident horizontally at her, also blocking the arrows in the air. Whoosh! For huge water curtains rose up from the surroundings, completely enveloping it. The figures of the three of them disappeared from sight. Just as the monster was about to tear it apart, it suddenly sensed an enemy appearing in the water curtain at some unknown time. It immediately thrust its trident heavily at Li Xinyue. But at this moment, the water curtain was torn apart, and a sword attacked head-on. The monster, unable to free its hands, could only try to grab it again. As Li Xinyue, under the trident, turned into water and dissipated, the surrounding water curtains also disappeared. Suddenly, it sensed a crisis approaching. Bang! A gunshot rang out. One of the enemies who had just been in front had somehow appeared behind it and was still in the air. The scales on its back were shattered, and a bullet successfully pierced into its body, splashing a spray of green blood. Before the monster could turn around, a sword followed closely and also pierced into the same wound. The monster endured immense pain and almost lost its strength, nearly kneeling on the ground. Blood also seeped from its mouth. It was incomparably furious and used all its strength to thrust the trident in its hand at Ling in front of it. But this wasn't over yet. The water flowing on Ling's body turned into two sharp arrows while the monster was caught off guard, directly piercing its eyes. Immediately afterward, a sharp sword light flashed by. The monster's right hand, holding the trident, was instantly severed due to the previous gunshot wound. Thump! The monster, with a sword sticking out of its back, knelt heavily on the ground. Ling wouldn't forget to deliver the final blow and immediately slashed at the connection between the monster's neck and head. This was its joint and also its weakest point. Although she couldn't chop off its head, it was more than enough to kill it. The rain stopped, and the three of them sat on the ground, breathing heavily. It's finally dead. That was tough. Li Xinyue even spat at the monster. If it weren't for the gun, there would have been no way to break its defense. Suyu picked up a scale from the ground, looked at it, then threw it away in disgust. By the way, why did you give her the gun? Wouldn't it be better for you to use it yourself? Li Xinyue looked at Ling, who was silent, and asked in confusion. Don't talk, I leveled up. Ling suddenly whispered. That's right, after killing this monster, she had gained a lot of experience points. She had broken through. The outline of the sword inside her body became clearer and clearer. She was trying to summon it. Ah, Ling, you. Suyu's face immediately lit up with joy upon hearing this. Of course, she knew Ling's level, and even more so what leveling up meant at this moment. It's just leveling up. What's the big fuss about? Li Xinyue rolled her eyes at the two of them. By the way, you still haven't answered my question from earlier? Ah, you mean that? Actually, it's because of my profession. If you were to fire the gun, you wouldn't be able to break through this monster's scales. The bullets would get stuck on them. Suyu patiently explained to her. Her professional ability wasn't a secret. Ah, so your profession is a shooter? I thought you were just a radar. Just as Li Xinyue was complaining, a golden sword suddenly appeared in Ling's hand as she sat on the ground. Chapter 160. The event's over? The blade was white, about 1.2 meters long, with a hilt of about 20 centimeters. Its overall length was comparable to the bronze swords Ling used, a standard size. It was a simple, ancient-looking sword, not as ornate as Ling had imagined. It lacked any superfluous decoration. The entire blade was made of an unknown metal, smooth to the touch yet radiating a chilling coldness. The blade emitted a faint golden light. As she picked it up, her face was reflected in its polished surface. There was no scabbard. Of course, Ling didn't need one. She swung the sword a couple of times, finding it surprisingly comfortable in her hand. The blade sliced through the air, emitting a series of humming sounds. After Ling executed a beautiful flourish, she tossed the weapon high into the air. Now that her ability level had increased, 3 swords were no longer the limit of her control. But just as this thought formed, the weapon in the air instantly split into 7, each a solid entity, identical to the original. This? Ling was stunned. The other 2 were stunned as well. Their faces were full of disbelief. After only a few minutes of acclamation, she completely mastered them. With a thought, the 7 swords combined into one and then vanished. It seems I won't need to carry weapons with me anymore. Wait, is your profession really sword immortal? Li Xinyue no longer knew how to react. It was no exaggeration to say Ling was the strongest professional she had ever seen. Bar none? I've always considered myself a mage, actually. She replied seriously. All right, a melee mage. Is that it? Li Xinyue was speechless. The rain had stopped, and the waves on the shore had calmed considerably. The 3, looking disheveled, returned to the house, took a bath, and prepared to rest again. Of course, Ling was on watch tonight. Just in case, she couldn't sleep. She believed that her ability to summon a weapon wasn't a coincidence. To verify her guess, she chatted briefly with the other 2. Both of them were currently at the cult level, and logically, they should be able to vaguely sense their internal condition. The conclusion was that Suyu could sense an abnormality within her body, while Li Xinyue couldn't. Excluding the possibility of lying, there was only one explanation. This was exclusive to hidden professions, and the outline Suyu sensed within her body, according to her description, was also quite outrageous: a gun. Not a pistol, but a rifle. And Ling boldly guessed it was very likely a sniper rifle. This was a bit much. And Ling believed that with her current strength, blocking pistol bullets was no problem, but a sniper rifle. Besides, being able to block it was one thing, but taking a shot with her current body would still do significant damage. And Ling considered the Sea King that attacked the island tonight as a mini-boss of this event. During this long night, she could only get some information from the channel chat due to boredom. Almost all the Awakened Islands were attacked by this mini-boss tonight. Some were in the first half of the night, while others hadn't encountered it yet. Undoubtedly, this was a deliberate arrangement by the system. The Sea Kings that attacked the islands varied in strength. And Ling guessed this was based on a comprehensive evaluation of the number of people on the island, their strength, and other factors. Of course, this didn't mean that everyone could safely escape this crisis. The strength of both sides wasn't fixed, meaning that there were cases where the Sea King attacking the island was weaker than the survivors, and naturally, cases where they were stronger. Most lone survivors were taken by surprise by the Sea King in their sleep. After all, people couldn't stay awake 24 hours a day. Some fought the Sea King to a mutual demise, and some were simply wiped out. While strength was the main factor, luck was often indispensable. Time passed until 4 a.m. And Ling, sitting on the roof, swung her legs out of boredom when suddenly a notification popped up. Channel 654 has fewer than 50,000 people and will be merged with Channel 666. Since Ling's channel was already a merged channel, it remained numbered 666 after the merger. Seeing this message, her eyes widened, as if she remembered something. I remember. Qin Xiao is in this channel, right? Remembering this, she opened their private chat and sent him a message. Are you all right? Qin, no problem, it's almost resolved. And Ling was taken aback by the instant reply. That wasn't right. How could he chat while fighting? And, you have time to chat? Qin, did you forget my profession? I'm a beast tamer. I don't have to do it myself. All right. And Ling had nothing to say to that. The two chatted for a bit, exchanging information, and then ended the conversation. It seemed that his situation wasn't very critical. He even had the leisure to ask for Ling's coordinates. They were now in the same channel, so they could meet if they weren't too far apart. She jumped down from the roof and went to her small boat at the port, checking the coordinates on the navigation locator. Her current location was still at the origin of the 6th Sea region, unchanged. The newly merged channel, due to its small population, was divided into 3 sea regions. There were currently 13 sea regions in total, corresponding exactly to the 130,000 survivors in this channel. It seems the survivors in this channel are quite capable. And Ling stood up and sat back on the roof. While the population of other channels had already dropped below 50,000, her channel still had 80,000 people, showing that the level of survivors here was much higher than in other channels. Of course, there were many such channels, and Ling's wasn't the only one. Time quickly arrived at morning. A sliver of light appeared on the eastern horizon, and the huge red sun rose from the water, dyeing the sea golden. The weather's cleared? And Ling, who was dozing off on the roof, almost fell asleep. Looking up at the sky again, it was cloudless and azure everywhere. The waves around the island had completely subsided, and everything seemed to have returned to normal. How could the weather clear up if the event wasn't over yet? No wonder it's been peaceful all night. And Ling got up and went back inside. Just then, Suyu and Li Xinyue also woke up and were slightly surprised to see the cloudless sky outside. Is the event over? Suyu said in disbelief. Both of them shook their heads. Only Li Xinyue was in high spirits. Great. We can finally go out to sea. Are you in that much of a hurry? You contributed a lot yesterday too. Have a meal before you go. With their warm invitation, she finally relented and agreed.